I think there's more than one reason why adolescents are more at risk. Now, first and foremost is it's a stressful period of time. There are at least 5 developmental tasks that you have to accomplish sometime before adolescence ends. And so adolescence begins when puberty begins. So it's a real sign. It's a biological moment. So for boys, it's pigmented pubic hair. As soon as you have pigmented pubic hair, puberty has started, adolescence, the count has started. You're supposed to finish your adolescence in 10 to 12 years. And for girls, it's breast buds. So it's not having your menses, and it's not being able to have necessarily sperm inside your semen. It is those first biological signs that show you puberty, and now we have the clock going. And in that time period, there are 5 stressful things that you have to accomplish. The first is you have to get used to the physical changes of puberty. Now, anyone who has a recollection of middle school, and particularly bells going off to end class from one period to another, and a boy who has a sexy thought that goes through his head, and all of a sudden he gets aroused in a way that he spends most of junior high school or middle school with books in front of his genitals as he's running around, you know, from one class to another. Or he gets a pimple, or his nose grows, or a girl develops breasts before anybody else does. And being able to adjust to those physical changes is the first task. The second is being able to separate from mom and dad or your guardians. And typically teenagers have, you know, different tastes in music, different tastes in politics, different tastes in clothing. And if we look at billboards in the United States of clothing, whether it's Abercrombie and Fitch, or if it's Calvin Klein, they are always adolescent or pre-adolescent looking kids who have clothes that are very different than the adults are wearing. So that when I was younger, you wore tight clothes when you were a teenager. When my kids became teenagers, they started wearing very baggy clothes that were very different, that 3 people could fit into the pair of pants. And so moving away and testing those things and being able to have a healthy separation is one of the important parts, which if you're healthy, have a healthy separation, you can actually eat with your mom and dad and they can say something stupid and you don't get excited because you realize that they're separate from you. The third is the development of a social network, which for boys very often at younger ages is about sports or hobbies. And for girls, they're a little more sophisticated. They socialize in concentric circles, so the coolest kids are in the middle, but you might hang out with the girl who's a very good athlete on the hockey field, and you might be cool with the girl who's a great math student in math class. And then next is you have to have vocational or educational goals. So when you're younger, it might be U.S. history, but by the time you're 22 or 23, you have to have some idea of what you want to do with your life. And so someone who's 40 and has never really had one career and keeps moving from one to another is being very adolescent. And the last one is sexual orientation. So even if you've never had physical intercourse, the fact is that by the time you're 23, 22, 24, you should know what's turning you on, because the biggest sex organ we have is between our ears. It's our brain. And that's what we know is turning us on or turning us off. So people who say they're still looking for themselves or exploring, their fluidity of their sexuality at 40 or 30, it's really being very adolescent. So you have those 5 developmental tasks, which are stressful, but on top of that, you have these brain changes. Those 2 things combined clearly makes the teenage years not only filled with more angst, but clearly at more risk for real depression. There's 2 areas that we should just talk about. Okay. And one of them is, what's the big deal if you have depression? And if one doesn't accept how real these disorders are, one then does that at the peril of the teenage patient or your child if they're an adolescent. And that is, or yourself, because you can understand why teenagers or adolescents, their mantra is, I want to be the same. I want to be just like everyone else. And for the parent, it's very often, it's just a phase. Hopefully they'll outgrow it. And the danger for that is that if you get sick when you're in high school and you are too tired in the morning to wake up, or you can't concentrate, or you don't have the motivation to study, you very quickly will start to fail. and you'll either have to go to summer school, or you'll be kicked off the football team, you'll lose the coveted seat at the right table in the cafeteria, and very often you lose out. You're no longer on that curve that everyone else is on, and it's very hard, even if you get treatment, to get back up, versus an adult who gets sick, who gets depression. Well, what's the big deal? It'll take me a few weeks to get well, but if I don't go out for dinner with my friends, or I stop playing tennis with the group of guys I play tennis with, you know, nothing terrible will happen. They'll forgive me, and I won't get fired from my job, and most probably my wife won't leave me, but my girlfriend might if I was 16 years old, because I'm so grumpy and irritable. And so there's a tremendous cost. And the second piece is that teenagers, when they're depressed, get hopeless. And when they get hopeless, that's when they try to hurt themselves. And the fact that 5,000 teenagers kill themselves every year between the ages of 14 and 24 in the United States is criminal, as far as I'm concerned. And the leading cause of death among teenagers is accidents. The second is homicide, and the third is suicide. In New York, by the way, suicide is number 2 because we can't get a hold of handguns here. So these are all psychiatric outcomes, because people who have ADHD have more car accidents, and their car accidents are 3 times more expensive than kids who don't have it. And people who have depression are, you know, much more likely not only to complete suicide, but to attempt suicide.